Good morning. This is Mark Schaffer on Update, and we're glad you've joined us this morning. I have with me today Je'net Kreitner from Grandma's House of Hope. And Je'net, we want to talk a little bit about your ministry today, find out about your calling, what the Lord is doing and has done, and kind of what your needs are so we can inform our listeners about the great work that you're doing in North Orange County and really throughout Orange County, and maybe come alongside and partner with you.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about Grandma's House of Hope. What's your mission and kind of your purpose? How do you define it?
Okay. Grandma's House of Hope's mission is to empower the invisible populations of Orange County. So by that I mean that we really try to dig deep and look for services and populations that truly fall through the cracks. That leads us to our work with women who are rejected time and time again from housing programs because their stories are too complicated. And also to our work with motel families and children living in motels and the gap between school food at the cafeteria and weekends when they're facing hunger.
So is it a housing program mainly?
About 75% of what we do is our housing program. That's where our biggest budget is with our the women's housing program. We do safe haven, emergency, transitional, and long-term housing for women who have significant challenges.
Well, tell me about your housing. How many beds do you have? Do you count them in beds or?
Well, we have 98 beds in 11 homes on 5 different
homes.
Properties.
Great.
We started in 2004, basically out of the home that my husband and I were living in. And
I love that.
I kept bringing home the woman from the bus stop and putting her up in the spare bedroom, and that population started to exceed our family's population.
Okay.
And eventually we made the decision to move out of the house, turn that into a women's home entirely, and that was in 2007. We became a nonprofit, and in the last 7-8 years, we have increased from one house to 11 homes and from 10 beds to 98.
Wow.
Yeah, God's with us.
Yeah, how did that increase happen outside of, obviously God's blessing?
It shouldn't have happened at all, so it all has to be God's blessing. Honestly, this was not the way that I envisioned myself living out the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. I was college educated in the arts. I went to college on an opera scholarship. I double majored in theater. I went to the American Conservatory Theater where I got my equity card and worked in the entertainment industry for 15 years.
Wow.
And closing in on about 3 years after my first son was born, I was actually doing a show called Homeless, a street opera, which is ironic.
Okay.
And the part that I was playing was a character named Tess, who was 9 months pregnant. She was a streetwalker, and she was a heroin addict. And I shot up, gave birth, and died on stage and sang the whole thing because it was a quote-unquote light opera.
Wow.
It was a devastating story about this woman, and as I was doing the part, the storyline was about a woman whose father had molested her at a very young age and how her mother didn't protect her from that. And unbeknownst to me at the time, that had been my story, and I had buried it and repressed it. And after the show closed, about 6 months later, my brother took me out for breakfast. He had come and seen the show, and it triggered for him. And I'll never forget him sharing with me over breakfast that morning how the show had affected him and realizing that I was part of this story as myself.
Wow.
So my life started to spiral out of control at that point. I found myself very unable to handle all of what was going on for me, and my marriage dissolved. I went to the NAMM convention in Anaheim. This man targeted me who kind of just knew me by the way I breathed. And I let him talk me into selling my business, giving him all the money, and moving off to another state. And within 3 years, he had destroyed my self-confidence, my self-worth. He drove me back to Anaheim 3 years later and left me at the side of the curb with my 7-year-old son to take care of. I had $20 in my pocket. I had 2 suitcases to my name that were not on rollers in those days. Yeah. And I remember huddling in a phone booth. They still had phone booths in 1994, and it was raining, and thinking that life really couldn't get any worse than it was at that moment. And I found that it could, and it did. But God had a plan for all of this, I know. And it was through this devastating event that I came to know the Lord, that, He redeemed my life and turned it around. I'm a new creation in Christ. And I know now that God had His hand on me from the time I was a little girl, that He knew I'd be strong enough to survive this story and take it forth and turn my life into a ministry about helping women with complicated stories like my own.
It is amazing how our God works that way, isn't it? I mean, you and I were talking just before about 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 and following, where it says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort which we ourselves are comforted by God." And I mean, that's your story. That's what God has done. And as much as I hate to hear you say that you went through all of that, and I'm sure, I mean, I can see some pain in your face right now in telling it. But then there's the story of deliverance, and then there's the story of, okay, now I need to act on this. And I think that that's just a great heart to come from. And Grandma's House of Hope, just offering hope to these women, is amazing. I want to kind of go to the next topic and kind of transition us into, what's Nana's Kids?
Okay. So Nana's Kids is a program that addresses children on the free lunch program at school who are living in a homeless condition, such as living in a motel or living doubled or tripled up with other families. So these are kids who are eating breakfast and lunch at school on the school lunch program. And then in the evenings and on Friday in particular, all the way through the weekend, it's very likely that they're going without food or not. Insubstantial food.
Okay.
So our program finds these kids at motels or through after-school programs that deal with at-risk youth, and we deliver food bags to them that is aimed at carrying them through all of the weekends until they get back to school on Monday morning.
Wow.
And that program is really near and dear to my heart because, and this I hope inspires your listeners that this, something like this can really grow out of a homegrown, like out of your driveway kind of ministry. I mean, our family packed 10 bags of food a week, took them to a local motel, and, last year we just passed 1.4 million meals to kids living in homeless conditions at Grandma's House of Hope. We touch about 3,500 lives a year.
Wow.
3,300 of them are in that program.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe I recall talking with, it was either with you or someone in your organization, about how you package the food there. That it's not in a way where, it's in a way where kids want it and they don't feel like it's, a handout type of thing. It's not in a special bag that says, we're helping you.
Right. Actually, some of the programs that try to give food to kids are delivered out from the school itself. And what I found was that the kids that were getting food from school were embarrassed about taking that food home from school with them. They were taking it home in something that looked out of place, and this bag would get knocked out of their hands, and then they'd get teased by the other kids, and so they stopped self-identifying that they were hungry. So we decided we would take it to the next step. We took the services directly to the kids where they lived, so we took the element of embarrassment out of it for them.
Great. In those bags, do you just put food? I mean, are you able to encourage them in any way? I mean, do you put a little New Testament in or a Bible verse, or are you trying to, I know we talked about you being a faith-based organization because you want to make sure that you are welcoming to everyone.
Well, we feel that we're being hands and feet of Jesus in this program in particular, so we don't evangelize in this program. We do put little words of encouragement that are, not faith-based in the bags, and also some health and nutrition tips and fun things to help them learn how to eat healthy. And also all the food in the bags can be prepared on a hot plate or in a microwave because most of these kids don't have kitchens. But in our housing program, we are faith-based. We're Christ-centered. We make no bones about it. We accept all faiths and religions, and, anybody's welcome to walk in the door, but we pray in and out of our meetings there. We have Bible studies, and, we talk about the Lord a lot. We read Jesus Calling every single day in our program.
Do you?
I've read it 4 years in a row now. I love that
awesome.
book. Yeah.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about transitional housing.
Sure. What's different about what Grandma's House of Hope does for the community in Orange County is that As I said before, we really try to gear in on women who are turned away time and time again from other programs for whatever reason, whether it be that they have a mental illness that requires them to take a medication, but the medication will make them pop dirty for a drug test, so they're not allowed in the program for that reason. And, that's a horrible dilemma. Do I stay on my meds and go in, and live on the street, or do I give up my meds and go into a housing program where I'm likely to end up on the streets again because once I'm off my meds, I'm unstable?
Yeah.
Women who are homeless and have cancer. We have the only program in Orange County that has a housing program specifically for women who have breast cancer and other cancers. Because if you're homeless and you get diagnosed with cancer, typically you're in 3rd or 4th stage cancer when you find out. And if you don't have a place to live, most hospitals cannot treat you. So if you show up for chemo and they say, who's driving you home? You say, I don't really have a home. They'll cancel chemo and radiation because you don't have a place to recover.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're homeless and you have cancer, it's like you're being handed a death sentence. And, Grandma's House of Hope, that just seems to be the final insult that anybody could possibly ever experience, that you're sick. And because you're sick, you can't go into a program.
Wow.
So you can't, the Women in Our Healing House program, which is the house that my husband and I lived in, has now been turned over to this program. The women in this program may need to stay in bed all day. So they can't get up and look for a job yet. They need to be actively engaged in their healing. And that whole program is about remission and recovery and healing. And unfortunately, in some cases, when the Lord is calling them home, and we have to face the concept of hospice care. We found this amazing way to work and be hospice, even though we're not a boarding care, we're not a medical facility. But we found the county and social service agencies and hospice willing to work with us, because this woman who's been with us now for 18 months or so now has come to know us as her family, and she has no one else. So to take her from our home and move her into to a care facility where maybe her bills are paid, but she can't be medicated to the extent of her comfort, and she's surrounded by people she doesn't know, seems to be wrong. So we found this great way of, the women that had been living in the house had to step out of the role of caregiver at the time of hospice. So they became just her family support. And then we reached out to our other program houses and asked for volunteers to come and sit with these women during their final weeks and pray and care for them. And, it's really amazing to me that when we reached out to the other women in our program, that the women who really felt a calling for it were our human trafficking survivors.
Wow.
That level of sincere understanding of suffering, seemed to be a place where they could meet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and our listeners can't see you right now, but as you talked about those women, I see your eyes start to water and tear up. I can tell you really have a place in your heart for that. I think that's amazing that Grandma's House of Hope has become their family. And like you said, people recovering from cancer, they can't do anything for themselves. They've got to lay in bed. So they're being served by these women, and they do become a family to them. That's an amazing ministry.
We have a whole a culture of community service in our program built in. So every woman in our program, as part of their program, gives back 1 to 3 hours every week into community service. And that could look like volunteering at the local library, or taking a commitment at a 12-step meeting, or going to a woman who needs to sit through chemotherapy and just being her support. Wow. So they get out of themselves and their own thing and reach out to others, and the healing that happens there.
That's so important in their own recovery, to be able to give and look outside of themselves and say, wow, other people have it as bad or worse, and now I get to tend to them. That's a great way to exercise faith, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. Tell me a little bit. We haven't talked on the human trafficking. You just brought that up. What are you doing in that arena?
Well, again, so much of this, it touches on my own life story. I was trafficked as a child by my father when I was 6 to 10 years old. in an underground thing before people knew what human trafficking was. And when we started this ministry and human trafficking got a name back in like 2005, 2007, we became members of the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force. And we started to receive these women from sometimes other countries, or, now it's not a byproduct of other countries anymore. It's homegrown right here in the United States and right here in Orange County. We're finding that kids that run away from home between 12 and 16 years old are approached by a human trafficker. 85% of them are approached by a human trafficker within 48 hours after they leave home.
Wow.
And 60% of those kids will engage in a conversation and go to the next step, whether it be buying them a meal or giving them some clothes or, part of that grooming process. So it's a frightening thing to think about our young men and women being subject to this horrific pattern of behavior.
Well, that's amazing to me, because think of the amount of people who are out there preying on these children that within 48 hours they can identify someone who's run away from home, approach them, engage them, and try and take them to that next step.
Right.
I mean, the sheer number of people out there with those bad intentions, it has to be huge.
And it's like that man who approached me in Anaheim who knew my story but the way I breathed.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with these kids. Most of them are runaways, or they've left a home that's unsafe. A lot of them have been traumatized as younger in their lives, and it's not safe for them to go home.
Yeah.
So it's in something in the way that you just are when you're a victim of that kind of trauma as a child, that these predators, it's like there's a target on your back, and it's invisible, but it's not. So,
well, I've always heard that in most cases they already have some sort of a relationship or have been approached by these, we'll say men. Obviously it could be men or women who are preying on them, and they already have some sort of relationship, and they see them as a safe place to go,
right,
when they're really not.
And many times it's because these kids have had inappropriate relationships with older men in the past. So just by the fact that a 40-something-year-old man can approach a 12-year-old, and they don't just get up and walk away.
Right.
What's this? Creepy guy.
Yeah.
The fact that they would engage in a conversation is the first clue.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now, what are you doing in that arena? We've talked about it now, but I didn't really let you answer the question.
Well, we are the first choice of human trafficking rescues that come in through the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force. And one of the reasons for that is because, again, we bend our parameters to accept women. Domestic violence shelters have been the typical go-to for human trafficking rescues, but just by the couple of rules that they have to abide by, like giving up their cell phone or the fact they can't come and go off the property as they wish for the first 30 to 45 days, makes a human trafficking rescue feel like they're walking into another control situation. Right. So we allow them to keep their cell phones. They're free to come and go. And again, we're finding that we're the ones that they start to trust and go on the road to recovery. I'm also very proud to be serving on the Anti-Human Trafficking Congressional Advisory Committee with Representative Royce. Okay. So lending our voice to a larger picture and watching how Congress is moving to support the efforts to stop human trafficking.
Okay. What events do you have coming up? I know we have a golf tournament, miniature golf tournament coming up.
Isn't that fun? This is our first ever medieval miniature golf tournament, and the idea behind this is that it's a fundraiser for the entire family. So mom and dad can bring the kids out to do miniature golf and have pizza, and it's like a typical golf tournament, but on a kid level. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Part of your ticket price goes to helping us bring disadvantaged at-risk youth to the golf tournament as well. So we're going to bring 20 to 30 kids from the Santa Ana Boys and Girls Club out to enjoy the day, and some of our kids in our Nana's Kids program. So we're pretty excited. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's September 26th.
I see that. It's September 26th at 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And it's at Camelot Golfland.
Yep.
On, 3200 East Carpenter Avenue, Anaheim, California.
Correct. Just off the 91 freeway near Kramer.
Okay. And is this one of your main fundraising efforts through the year, or is this just...
This was just a bright idea somebody had after, we actually had a burglary back in June. And
I read about that.
Yeah, and we had a lot of people. I mean, that was an amazing outpouring of support from the community. Within 48 hours, we had brought in 20,000 pounds of food and nearly...
Was it your food kitchen that was...
It was our storage sheds that where we store the food for Nana's kids for the packing at the beginning of every month, and it was at the end of the month, so it was all our food for the next food packing for the kids.
Yeah.
So we lost about 1,500 pounds of food, and they had targeted like the really expensive stuff, like the proteins and the peanut butter and stuff like that. So replacing it, in time for the food packing the next day, where we ironically had a bunch of kids coming in that were at-risk youth that were doing the community service to pack the food for these kids.
Wow.
And the TV stations and radio stations got on board with it. And like I said, 20,000 pounds of food, and almost $30,000 later, the community had shown us that what we were doing was really important. They were behind us. So this event is to encourage those folks that, became new partners with us to come out and enjoy a day with us.
Right. Come out and meet us and spend a day and things like that. That's great. What other events do you do during the year?
Oh, my favorite one is coming up. And it's interesting that I'm on a Christian station talking about it because it's on Halloween, but it's a Safe Harvest event.
Okay.
So this event takes place at the West Anaheim Youth Center on Beach Boulevard, right in the middle of the motel district.
Okay.
And our target is children living in those motels in that area. And the idea behind it is we don't want them to be unsafely trick-or-treating on Halloween. So if you're trick-or-treating from a motel room to a motel room, it's one of two things. It's dangerous or it's disappointing because nobody can afford the candy.
Right.
So about 5 years ago, we started our very first Safe Harvest event. So it's like a church harvest fair, but it's completely free. Everything is absolutely free to the kids. They get to play games. They get to do a toy redemption booth. We have live entertainment. We serve a hot meal, and it's all completely free.
Great.
And the first year we had 400 kids there. Last year we had over 1,200.
Wow.
So we need candy and we need costumes. So last year's costume, we try to get these costumes out to the kids about a week and a half to 2 weeks before the event, so the parents don't feel pressured to spend $30 or $40 on a costume, which is
What about face painting?
Face painting is great.
You need some face painters.
Yeah. Music. We really need a food sponsor for this event. We don't have a food sponsor yet, so we want to be able to bring out some food trucks and that kind of thing. So, but candy drives and costume drives and volunteer. It is the blast of the century.
I bet. Cool. I guess that kind of transitions us into how can our listeners help? I mean, volunteers, candy, what else?
Pray. Yeah.
Nice.
Over and above everything, please pray for us.
Yeah.
Like any other nonprofit, we have our own challenges in maintaining our programs and just having the support that we need to continue our work. And God has been so gracious and so generous with us. But the work is big. And as I was telling you prior to, I think we're talking, and we get 7,000 calls for help every year.
Yeah.
400 to 600 people calling us every single month needing help.
Wow.
And we're only as big as we can support, through our resources. So pray that God releases and continues to release His generosity to us. Certainly, you become financial partners with us, become volunteers with us, become a part of, like I said, our prayer family is probably the most important thing I could
And how do they contact you? What's your website? What's your best
really
way
easy.
to contact?
It's grandmashouseofhope.org. So it's grandma, GRANDMAS, houseofhope.org. You can call us. Our offices are in Santa Ana, 714-558-8600. We'd love to get you plugged in, and we'd be excited to work with any of your listeners.
Okay, repeat the number one more time and the website one more time just so everyone can write it down now.
Sure, www.grandmashouseofhope.org, 714-558-8600.
Well, thank you, Je'net, for coming and joining us in the studio today. Blessings to you. We'll be praying for your ministry. Please keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And we're glad to partner with you here at KWAVE.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, God bless you.
God bless you, too.
You've been listening to the Update program. The views and opinions expressed on the update are not necessarily those of the staff, management, sponsors, or ownership of the station. We welcome your thoughts. Send them to Update Program, 3000 West MacArthur, Suite 500, Santa Ana, California, 92704. Thank you for listening, and God bless.